Got on my leather jacket Thriller. The show ain't nothing Miller. Man, I'm a lady killer. If I want her, I'm a stealer. I promise I can make her fly away like caterpillars. So if you don't know by now, then you should probably get familiar.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Bond Agency Ask the Expert. I'm Leticia Remauro. I'm here with my partner George. Hi George, how are you?
Good, Leticia, how you doing?
I'm doing good. And we're here with our very dear friend Michael Tobman. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a treat. Michael, how are you doing?
Excellent, excellent. I'll give everyone a warning now. I have two teenagers in the house, and I'm not sure what kind of mood they're in, so they may jump in at any time asking for stuff.
Listen, we love kids on this show. We love teenagers. We've had all kinds of interruptions. Our audience is used to it. Actually, I think they kind of prefer it if we're a little drunk and if there are a few interruptions going on. So if you want to grab a beer and we could get going. So for those of you who don't know about Michael Tobman, let me tell you about Michael Tobman. He's a dear friend. He and I have served in many political campaigns together in the past. And you've seen us on Inside City Hall with Lewis on Consultants Corner. But Michael's born in Brooklyn. And he's held important positions in government relations, and communications for over 25 years. He's the membership director of the Rent Stabilization Association, the largest trade association in New York, representing the interests and priorities of over 25,000 members who own or manage over 1 million units of affordable housing. Folks, this is important because, especially in big cities, obviously, RSA, Michael, they represent in New York. But if you're coming in viewing from another big city, sure, a lot of what we're talking about today is probably going to affect you no matter where you are located across the United States and in other countries. Michael served as general consultant or communications director in hotly contested elections at every level of government and has coordinated statewide issue campaigns concerning budget proposals from 4 governors. Michael advises a growing public charter school network, assists in organizing a prominent faith-based community, and regularly assists political party, civic, and union leadership. He is a former senior aide to U.S. Senator Chuck Schumer, was chief of staff of the Nassau County Legislature, and clerked after law school in local courts. Michael's perspective is centrist, open-minded, and non-partisan. His grounding in communications, politics, and policy is authentic and sincere, and I could vouch for that.
Thank you.
So welcome to you here today, Michael.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for including me.
Well, today a couple of things have happened over the weekend. Today I just stood with parents, special ed students, special needs students, who are crying for schools to open. And we stood in front of the UFT and we asked them to please help the mayor create a plan because the teachers want to go back to work. But more importantly, the children need their services because, as you know, in special needs, Michael, a day without services could set a kid, or a month without services could set a kid back in years. So why don't we talk a little bit about your work with the schools and where you think we're heading with the ability to open schools?
The balance in public education and to a certain extent private and independent schools that have a lot more leeway and latitude to make decisions. But in public education, the balance has always been how to keep all families engaged and participating in the city public school system. That includes children, students who are high-performing students who could sort of learn wherever you put them, students who make up the vast middle of this, and then, of course, students who need help, students with IEPs that need supplemental and special services, around which there are processes and protections and a lot of court cases about the rights to those services. Students who could learn anywhere can learn anywhere. And really, as you said, Leticia, the students who have IEPs and get supplemental services every day, every week, and at this point, the months that go by is time that they're not going to get back. It's not something that could just be made up. Really, my hat's off, and so much credit is due to the providers of those services: teachers, speech therapists, physical therapists, occupational therapists, and then at the more profound spectrum of need, those that work with children on the spectrum. How they've been getting any of this work done remotely is a wonder. So these are students that have to go back quickly. How you balance all of these competing interests in the public education system with real safety needs and public health needs, I don't know. I mean, do you err in favor of just opening up the schools and having procedures and safety protocols in place? Probably the way to go. I don't know that you can guess it any other way or how you thread that needle. It's more questions than
I think that from the parents' perspective, especially, it's the services right now are being provided if they take their kids to the schools.
Right.
So they give them right now appointments for PT and OT and speech, and so the parents are taking the kids to the schools for their appointments so that they can get those services. But if there's a parent like that works in a hospital or works in as a frontliner or works anywhere for that fact, who can't take off work to get their kid there, then you have a babysitter, and if the babysitter can't do it, they're finding it so very difficult to be able to get those kids the services. And it kind of boggles the mind, Michael, right? Because, and we know this from the charter schools who serve special needs with IEP, the direction is just not there. It's not clear guidance, and nobody's blaming anybody because look, it's COVID. We've never dealt with this before. Nobody is an expert on it. So everybody is bungling their way through it. But the science has said that the kids can't are low risk for getting it and are low risk for infecting others with it and carrying it. So at some point, I think the mayor and the chancellor have to say, hey, here's our plan. Especially with special needs. There's they're either a 6 or a 10 or a 12 in a class. It's not like there's 30 kids all with one or more parents. There's maybe, as I said, up to 12 kids in a class, and they have paras and they have the teacher. They can safely distance rather than starting everybody, getting everybody crazy.
Schools,
I think they should balance it.
Schools are the primary source of childcare for working families, and that's just how society is set up. And you really you hit the nail on the head, which is it's a lack of leadership. While there are no good answers and there are only guesses right now, we can make plans. We have plans, but then there could be a spike in the third week of August or in the first week of September, right before Labor Day, and all those plans go out the window. But that's been the case since this started. And you're also right in saying we have nothing to compare this to other than the Spanish flu. And I don't know that 1918 is really a comparable analogy. But it really is a lack of leadership through this whole process at the city level and specifically with the schools. The sort of pell-mell pinball machine, hit the flipper, the ball's going in a different direction. That's how the mayor and the chancellor feels that day. It has really left people feeling unmoored in a very stressful situation, and not that the public health aspect. Sorry, George.
And confused, right? There's a mixed message because now I'm hearing they're going to open up daycare to everybody, and everyone could have daycare through daycare centers.
Right.
And again, you guys are way smarter at this stuff than me. I'm going to be Joe Public today. I don't have kids, so I don't really process all this information. But how is opening a daycare safer than opening the school?
I imagine it's not.
It's and I think the mixed message is driving everybody insane. It doesn't make sense from my perspective, an outsider's perspective, not having children to worry about going to school. It's just bizarre.
And so much of this is getting wrapped up in larger politics. We see it coming out of the news around the presidential campaign, out of Washington, and whatever opinion about the administration, infighting within the White House, and then, the tug of tug of war implies that it's actually equal. I would just say the governor constantly slapping the mayor around is a more accurate presentation. And the mayor just invites it. He says something and he does something and everyone holds their breath, and 5 seconds later, there's the response from Albany because the mayor invited it. I think there's a lot of noise and a lot of confusion around something. You're right, Leticia. It's so consequential, not just for the reopening of the economy and for the providing of supplemental and special services for children that need them, but just, what are the kids going to do come September? We could have this conversation every single day, and we'd have a lot to talk about, and nothing would be resolved. And that's where leadership comes in, because notwithstanding that chaos and confusion, leadership says, this is the path we're going to go down, and we're going to make adjustments around that. And there's just been an absence of it at the city level.
Yeah, Michael, what I don't understand is here in New York City, we are this shining, we are supposed to be the example for every other city. We're the largest, we're the greatest, we're the most capable city in the world, And we can't make a plan that is consistent to bring kids back to school. And that is so terribly frustrating. But for somebody who has a special needs child, and I was a parent of a special needs child, you look to the education system for help and assistance and guidance. And they generally do a good job providing it. That's why I think the moms chose to go in front of the UFT today, because we believe that if the teachers union can get together with the mayor and say, look, we have to create a plan that's going to keep our teachers safe, keep our kids safe, and let us do the job that all these men and women were trained to do, teach children. And if they could step in and be the arbitrator, if you will, of the plan, I think that everybody would be better off. To
that, unions represent their members. Unions represent the priorities and policy preferences and politics. It's a lot of P's of their members, and oftentimes the interests of teachers are aligned with the interests of students, and that's why the UFT has had such a big footprint and a large voice and such sway in education policy, because a lot of the time those interests are aligned. But in this situation, the interests of families, the interests of the economy, the interests of parents and the students and the teachers aren't quite as aligned as they are under the best of circumstances. Years ago, and Leticia, you remember this, when you were with Governor Pataki, the economy was booming, right? And budget battles weren't about who was getting less or who was getting cut. Budget battles were about who's getting less more, right? And in those situations, everyone could literally afford to be magnanimous and say, okay, we'll do this. We'll provide extra X minutes of instruction because we're going to be getting this many X dollars. There's no more money. There's no money, and everyone's interests are not necessarily as aligned as they are under the best of circumstances. So can the UFT be an honest broker here? We saw 1199 came in and was the deciding voice in closing the schools. Again, I just think when, there's a line from a movie a couple of years ago that said, when things aren't seen for what they really are, it's dangerous. I think everybody needs to have a very honest view of everyone's interests and what's going on and how we see these things. And, the gender impact and how this is falling disproportionately on women and women of color, and how class and geography and use of public transportation and housing situations and NYCHA and all of this is just wrapped up in it. And I think we have not, as a city, and this would be a good segue to talk about other stuff, as a city, we have not been honest about the challenges. We've been focused on slogans, and we've been focused on social justice as a slogan rather than discussing the class implications and how things can get done and what best alternatives are. Because, governing by slogan is a lot easier if you're not interested in the results and you're not going to be around in a year or two to discuss the results, because the mayor is going to be out, most of the city council is going to be out. So, slogans are easy for them now, and then they just have to get through the next 12 months. But I'm not being too cynical.
No, I don't think you're being too cynical, because, frankly, if we're not in this, if I see another commercial telling me we're all in this together, and then I look on Facebook at everybody tearing each other's throats out, I'm just going to go crazy, because we're not showing that we're in this together. We're all being affected, but it doesn't mean that we're in it together. And that's one of the reasons that we need to have our unions, we need to have our small business owners, we need to have our parents. You're right. We need an honest discussion, Michael. And if we had a mayor that was interested in leading, instead of photo ops and slogans, maybe he'd pull us all together and have that conversation.
I've been in government politics for 27 years now. There's nothing wrong with photo ops. There's nothing wrong with talking points. There's nothing wrong with what politicians do. There's nothing inherently unproductive about it. But this mayor, from the minute he was elected, took office in January 2014. The minute he was elected, he was clearly not interested in the job of being mayor. He was always looking someplace else. And not being here means you don't have a reservoir of goodwill or credibility to make hard decisions, whether it's on policing, education, homelessness, transportation, infrastructure, intergroup relations. It's all just kind of, what's the next job? What's he looking for? And that's what's been so disappointing. But, all these issues are connected, which is not a cop-out. But when we're looking at, you said people are going to be working remotely. Law firms, offices, banks, businesses that have been taking up 5-6 floors in Midtown Towers realize now that they don't need them. They need 2 floors. So what are you going to do with these 3 or 4 floors? How does that impact taxes? Excuse me. This is like Brooklyn ambient.
Your cat there? Maybe it's the mayor.
Yeah. So it's and these people, look, those who staying in New York City is a conscious decision you make, right? That you want to be in New York City because it's so special and because it has so much to offer, not both despite of its difficulties and because of its difficulties. You enjoy it more and it's sweeter because it's so difficult. But at some point, it's easier for some families to leave. We talked about education. When do families leave? When their kids are going into the middle school years. That's when they decamp for Montclair, Maplewood, Nassau County, Westchester, the river towns, North Carolina, Florida, Texas, exactly. So, because staying in New York City is a decision you make, that takes work. It should be reflected in the priorities and policies of the city government to say, we're going to make this all a little easier. And we haven't seen it.
I haven't seen it. And what's the first 2 things that anybody who's purchasing a piece of property has? How's the school district and what's the crime statistics like in the neighborhood, for young families. And we're failing on both of those right now. Mm-hmm. We don't have a great plan for opening the schools, and crime is through the roof. And I don't care where you live, it's through the roof. Blocks away from us, I've had 4 shootings in the adjacent neighborhood to mine in the last week, and it's crazy and it's scary, and people are going to start to vote with their feet, if you will. But let's talk about next year's election, because a lot of people are saying to me, well, who's going to run for mayor? What's going to happen? Term limits was supposed to be to give other people an opportunity to run, but we've seen it become a vehicle for musical chairs for a lot of districts, where people going from assembly to city council. So next year we're going to see 35 city council member seats turnover in the mayoralty, and so what's your take on it? And what do you think? Do you think we will have a more progressive mayor because that's the way the Democratic Party is going?
Right.
Or do you think we're going to have a more independent mayor? And do you think it's time for a third-party candidate maybe to walk in?
You mentioned term limits encouraging participation, but also the campaign finance system really has done as much, if not more, in getting people to run. What started off as a 2-to-1 match, and then 4-to-1, 3-to-1, I think at one point, then 6-to-1. Now I think it's 8-to-1 on donations that qualify. that means somebody who has the wherewithal to raise a modest amount of money then gets enough to run a robust campaign and give that kind of choice to the voters. So yes to term limits, but also the CFB. I have to give a plug because it's been an unwieldy system that they've done pretty well. What do I think? I think that at the council level, at the city legislature, we're going to see a run to the even further left because that's where the energy is, that's where the activism is, that's where the anger is. And that's also where the organizing talent is. So we're going to see that probably play out with more folks coming from the far or radical left. However, we just had the special election, well, quasi-special election in Queens for borough president. And there, Donovan Richards won, but he actually only won a few assembly districts. I think maybe it was 4 or 5 assembly districts, but he won so big in those assembly districts, sort of ran up the numbers there. Liz Crowley, represented a former city councilwoman who represented more moderate white ethnic parts of Queens, came in a very close second. And I think that for mayor in a big splintered field, if there are a lot of candidates running, is an important lesson for those who are going to look to appeal to a broad sort of diverse swath of New York City. And that includes moderate homeowner communities in neighborhoods like Maspeth, Middle Village, Sheepshead Bay, which is in Brooklyn. I'm just sort of moving around the city. Staten Island, the whole borough of it.
The whole borough.
It's the full diversity of New York City includes conservative neighborhoods, faith communities, law enforcement communities. It's not just where the focus has been in social justice conversation. So what's the next mayor going to do? I think the next mayor is going to come. There are people running that we don't even know about yet. So we'll see. I think how they win is probably going to be the traditional appeal to that broad swath of the left and then cobble together some coalitions. But how they govern, given the financial crisis we're in and the economic hole we're in, despite whatever promises they make, they're going to try and accomplish those on the social justice and diversity side. And those are many long overdue conversations. The more diversity, the better. But on the spreadsheet, if the numbers aren't there, they're probably going to have to govern, however they get elected, they're going to have to govern a bit more moderately and a bit more with an eye towards how do we pay for these things? And God, please, if you're listening, whoever is elected mayor, have a better relationship with Albany, because it certainly can't be worse than what we have now.
Yeah, it's
Better relationship with Albany, and in my opinion, a little bit of a background in business, because, if looking at this administration, I think what we're missing, not only from the mayor, but from all the city council members, is that they're not recognizing that the city is a corporation. And you have to have a little bit of business sense to be able to juggle hard times and to be able to carry the city through these hard times, instead of just spending like drunken sailors, which they did, even with the cuts to the budget this year. Right. They barely cut the budget. It's not like, look, this mayor went from, what was it, 72 billion
to 90 something
to 92 billion, and now they pared it back a little bit this time. That's still extraordinarily expensive, and it didn't make sense that the budget cuts that were doled out were so small, considering what we are projecting to. But he didn't care because it's his last term, and a lot of the city council didn't care because it's their last term. And whoever comes in, they think is gonna have to do exactly what you said.
You said something very important, and George, I'm sorry if you were about to say something. I'm talking over you, but that it's a business, and that the numbers have to make sense. And just sort of segueing into the work we do over at RSA, where we represent the interests and the priorities and policies of the owners and managers of regulated apartments, which is to say all the over 1 million units of affordable housing in New York City metro area are our members. And every single one of those apartments is a small business, an income-producing business within the larger income-producing business of a building. And the numbers have to make sense to pay taxes, oil, salaries for personnel, water and sewer, repairs, elevators, environmental mandates that come down. And yet there's this idea that among the left and the conversations that you've heard the slogan cancel rent. Okay, we'll get to that in a second. But the radical left thinks that rent is theft, right? That property is theft in some utopian Marxist view of the world. But, the numbers have to work in order to provide apartments. And if not, folks will walk away from these properties and sell to people who do not have the ties to the community that multi-generational owners have. They don't have the relationships with the tenants, and they're just going to see it as an investment, and we'll sort of see a shabification of the housing stock in New York City. But the idea that the diversity and economic health of the city is somehow not intimately intertwined with the ability of property owners to pay their bills is sort of preposterous. And aid to tenants and families, the extra $600 in unemployment from the federal government, unemployment insurance and benefits at the state level, food assistance at the city level, has all helped keep people in their apartments, but there has not been corresponding help for the actual owners of the buildings. And that is absolutely consistent with Leticia, with what you said in terms of viewing the city as something other than what it really is, which is a business that needs to make sense in order to keep providing these services and keep it an appealing place.
Yeah, and I think people, if I could add, I mean, people don't really understand that. I think the mentality in the general population is these big, rich landlords, with all their money and all their buildings. And I learned through you and our interactions with the RSA that's just not the case. These are your neighbors and friends who've had buildings in their family for years, right? That hire the plumber down the street, and they go to the deli to get their supplies, and they churn that local economy in a huge way. We can't allow people to forget they're really hurting those people the most.
And we're a diverse membership. So you come to a membership meeting at RSA and you see West Indian, African American, Chinese, Korean, Asian American. You see a lot of Albanian Americans that work in buildings in Brooklyn and Manhattan during the day and then go home to the buildings they own in the Bronx and do their job all over again, but for the property they own. Greek American homeowners throughout Queens and throughout Brooklyn. People that have a 6-unit building that they saved up and bought or inherited from mom or dad. And, the taxes, if in those cases, I have conversations with 65, 75-year-old owners that have one building with, let's say, 10 units. And much of my job is at RSA in terms of membership is the actual technical work and the service providing and things like that. But it's also to be a therapist and a counselor. I'm speaking to people and they're saying, my parents would be rolling over in their grave if they understood the taxes we're paying and what we're giving to the city and what we are not getting back. And we're being vilified. We're actually being called evil now. And they said, I'm glad mom and dad aren't around for this. And they said they don't know how much longer they're going to keep this in their family. It's tough.
Yeah, people
every time Albany,
every
time Albany comes down with another rule or another regulation, and then pile the city on, they don't understand the impact that it has on, it sounds like a great idea when they have these grand schemes, but they never actually ask these small business owners, these small property owners, how does it impact you and your ability to, provide service to your tenants? And of course, look, we all know that tenants are the lifeblood for small property owners. So of course a property owner wants to provide their tenant the best possible apartment, the best possible service. They want to keep them there. They want them to keep on re-upping the lease. They want to grow with them. It's always better for them if they don't have to put it back on the market. But to have people making decisions who have never understood what it was like to pay a mortgage, or to, own a piece of property, or to be a small business owner, or, it's insanity. And I just wonder, how the governor and the mayor thinks New York City is going to look in 5 years if they keep raising property taxes, if they keep raising mandates on small property owners without giving them the ability to raise rent.
Right.
I mean, if they don't look at this as a business, we're going to have a bunch of slums.
Or even appreciate that these things do run in cycles. You know, you have a lot of, I'm 47 now, so for me, more and more people are seeming younger, but separate
You're a
conversation.
baby compared
I feel that, brother.
You know, young people never want to hear that something's been considered before. We tried that, we did that, it didn't work. Here's what the consequence was. Maybe you could tweak it this way. We thought of that. This is what happened, you know, during the first year of the Dinkins administration. This is what went on, you know, when Koch first came into office. This is what happened. You know, Giuliani maybe, I don't know who he is now, but there was a time where you have a rational conversation about how the city could run. This is what we did then and there. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear it. They think it's never been done before, and we have the answer. Well, you know, there are parables and analogies to be made between the de Blasio years and the Lindsay years, not just that they're both very tall. You know, the idea of a free spending social contract that is needed and appropriate, and it should be there. Yes, beginning, middle, and end always, but it could, how it's executed, what it looks like, how it's funded, who it benefits, how it benefits. You know, these things all need to be revisited, right? You have to get, and you need to be able to have a conversation without being labeled wrong or evil, or in the case of property owners, you know, evil landlords or bloodsucking, and it just defies common sense. And now the idea that elected officials and candidates are not going to take real estate money it's as if it's not a foundational, necessary part of our city and local economy. It's
as if they don't deserve to be represented. I mean, why should the real estate industry not be donating to campaigns? Why? I mean, look, without the real estate industry, we'd have nowhere to live.
Mhm.
So, you know, in a city that is so many apartments, you know, they need to have a voice. And any candidate that says that they won't take real estate money, I think is ridiculous.
It's about balance. New York City is a renter city. There are owners, yes. People who are buying luxury glass condos, you know, boxes on the 41st floor, have the wherewithal to weather different situations. And young professionals coming in and moving into luxury condos and apartments in Long Island City and Astoria, and if they're very young professionals recently out of school, having mom or dad help and be paying rent on credit cards through apps now, it's all different. Okay, but for everyone else, which is the vast majority of renters, yes, their voices should be heard. Their concerns are a big part of our shared civic life. The other side of that equation, and it's not oppositional, it's how does this work for owners? How does it work for managers? It's about balance. And we used to have a balanced legislature. We used to have a balance in terms of the experience and the patience and sort of seeing the whole board of the legislators that were there. And that has changed. And I think not for the better.
Yeah, I think, Leticia, you brought this up to me. It feels, and I can't get it out of my head, it feels to me like they're trying to take away private ownership of property. It feels like a chip in that direction.
Well, the Marxist, you know, groups that, you know, and the real socialists, and they believe that home ownership shouldn't be. You shouldn't own property. It's bad to own property. And that's, you know, what's resonating with young people. And it just boggles my mind, because the one thing that I consistently run into talking to some of these young college kids is that they seem to think that the stuff just manifests itself. You know, it's just there. It's there, and you know, if you want to make $1 off of it, you're greedy. But they want their $5 for their macchiato, and they want their $300 for their sneakers, and they want their money there, right? But if for somehow or another, if you're a small business owner or you're a landlord, you must be evil because you want to collect rent and make money. You know,
you're right. There's been a conflating, which is to say things have been inappropriately combined between the very real, very serious, very consequential needs of those who without help would flounder and that is a legitimate function of government, and it is necessary, and it's feeds the diversity of New York City, and it's what makes us great. Those have been conflated with, like you said, relatively affluent, well-off professionals who believe that their needs, having expressed their needs, is enough, but they want it. And, that should be enough. And, my kids, one of whom just came over to play on his PS4, have heard me say 1,000 times, well, I want a pony. Well, I'm not getting a pony. And I'm not saying it's the same thing, but you're right.
It's not that far off.
Back to real estate for a second. So I grew up in Sheepshead Bay. I would have to take 2 buses, 2 trains to get where I am now, right? Literally, geographically. We grew up in a, Dad would take the command bus, it used to be called the command bus, into the city in the morning for work, and he'd take the train back. Mom was a teacher, both retired after decades-long careers in civil service. We lived where we could afford to live, right? And George, to your point, good schools, right? So I literally went to elementary school across the street from my house.
Me too.
Now, people want to live where they want to live and believe that there should be a function to ensure that they can afford to live where they want to live. Well, I wanted to live in the West Village. I want to live in Park Slope. I want to live in the Upper East Side. But we lived where we could afford to live, and I have lived where I could afford to live now. The idea of that need somehow controlling a public policy discussion around the affordability or whether there should be means testing for stabilized leases. Well, somebody that has a house out east that they could spend 4 months out of the year at, who also has a rent stabilized unit in Midtown Manhattan, I don't know that they should be driving the policy discussion around affordable housing. Anyway, that's my rant. You've heard me say it over drinks, and now I'm saying it to the wider audience.
I think it's legitimate, and there's a lot of validity to it. And I think that the younger people have to distinguish between need and want.
Mm-hmm.
And what we've done, I think, as parents, because my children, my daughter's 40. Both my one is 40 and one is going on 41. So now I'm talking to my grandson who's 15, and the difference. My daughter at least understood that we had to be able to afford the things she wanted, because we were, and people have heard, I'm not going to bore them, but I was poor, George was poor. We all lived within our means, right? We're not affluent, and we're still poor. But my grandson seems to think that if he wants it, it is a need, and therefore that need must be fulfilled by somebody. He doesn't care who, as long as it's fulfilled.
Right.
And, I blame us, the parents, this generation. Well, I raised my kids in the 80s and the 90s, and I blame us because we wanted them to have more than me. I didn't want, when the ice cream truck came down the block for my daughter, to have to wait for me to find pennies and nickels to cobble together. So I always made sure that, she had what she needed. That's on me, because somehow or another, we just are so used to providing whatever our kids want.
But it's and this gets back into the sort of mainstream current political and policy discussion. Growing up, nobody felt solidly middle class, sleepaway camp every summer. I mean, it was not, everything we wanted, everything we needed. It was a wonderful childhood. And you didn't realize that there was no money. Nobody felt poor, but because everyone around you, nobody had money, right? If nobody has money around you, no one had more than not. It was just a much more casual, much more intimate, I feel, time. Now, you see people living large online and TikTok and videos and everything on your phone. So you just feel as if your relative station compared to others is less. So you want more, and you believe that those wants are actual needs. And going back to the city council and mayor, et cetera, I think that anger, that relative feeling around status is what is driving so much. Not overdue, necessary social justice issues. Yes, please have that drive conversations. I am very close with and have close friends in the law enforcement community and around policing and reform and accountability. They can be reasonable conversations where reasonable people could disagree about what it should look like. But unfortunately, I feel like those issues are getting lost in the anger around this relative status piece that we're talking about. And I hope whoever is elected the next mayor can evade being captured by that false anger or that misplaced anger and focus more on getting the city back on track. Because like you said, so long as the underlying foundation of our economy is the market, rent isn't theft, and being able to provide for your building and your tenants is, has to work.
And the city did something pretty horrible. I want to mention and love to get your thoughts on. In my opinion, they told people in messaging, I guess not. I don't know if it's a law. You don't have to pay your rent,
Right.
but they demand their taxes.
Yeah.
And that to me is the biggest hypocritical load of bullshit that I've ever heard in my life, because they don't consider landlords people. Is what that sounds like to me. It's like this mystery place.
So many calls, dozens of calls, scores of calls from RSA members saying, tenants are coming to me and saying, the mayor told me I don't have to pay rent.
Unbelievable.
First of all, the mayor didn't say that, but his tone and his
Not just him.
position and how is being sort of presented by the activist class, yes, it sounded like the mayor told me I didn't have to pay rent. What happened was housing court was paused. There could be no non-payment proceedings, no evictions for non-payment. There could be no, other than the usual rent request and then the 5-day notice and late notices, there can't be late fees charged, et cetera. So they were making all these accommodations to ensure that tenants stayed in their home. And Leticia, you're right what you said earlier. No landlord, no manager or property owner wants to evict people. They want a tenant who pays, and they'll work with tenants 99 times out of 100 to make that work. Sometimes that means getting into housing court and making a deal in the hallway, because some tenants don't respond to anything until they get a notice that they have to appear in housing court. So that just becomes part of the negotiation, part of the process of keeping a paying tenant in a unit, which is what everybody wants. But you're right, George, the tone of it was that the mayor told me I didn't have to pay rent. And then they're getting emails and they're getting, and then area legislators, whether it's state assembly or state senate or city council, or all these people, Leticia, running for office next year for city council, are sending out emails and flyers saying, you don't need to pay your rent. Well,
Right.
What's that going to look like when housing court reopens? Let me just have a thought exercise for a second. So within the pandemic and the public health crisis, there are those who legitimately are strapped to pay their rent and are struggling. Because let's say they were a restaurant manager, food service, worked on Broadway, a production company, retail, any of the things off the books, any of those things that were shut down. And then, the sort of cascading or ripple consequence of that, the hardware store, the deli, the, place down the block. So exactly, those people were decimated by this. And they can't pay, or they paid some of it, or they were counting on the pandemic aid and unemployment insurance and it came in late, and they'll catch up. But then there are those who didn't want to pay just because they didn't want to pay. And they have $120,000, or they have $15,000 or $16,000 or $20,000 in checking. They just don't want to pay. And they saw an opportunity to not pay, figuring they're going to chase me and I'll wind up paying 60 cents on the dollar or 50 cents on the dollar when the court reopens. So within the court system, I hope there will be a way to differentiate between those cases which are, I lost my job, I worked in food service, I worked in catering, I worked in an event space, I worked in retail, as opposed to those who don't want to pay just because they didn't want to. Because if those who can pay but haven't are treated the same as those who can't pay everything all at once, well, it does people who can't pay legitimately a huge disservice.
Yeah.
And I feel when the mayor says you don't have to pay and we're doing this and we're the most equitable city, et cetera, well, that does everybody a disservice. Doesn't work.
But it's the hypocrisy of the city, as George said. As homeowners, right, as property owners, the city didn't say we're going to pause your property tax payment. They didn't say you don't have to pay.
What they said is we will slightly reduce the near usurious interest rate we charge you daily if you pay late.
Yeah,
Oh,
if you, right.
thanks.
Thanks. we're going to reduce your penalty, but you still have to pay in July, and that's the way.
What happens if they can't pay? They take the property, the city takes the property?
Well, if the property has a mortgage on it, the property taxes generally are wrapped up in your mortgage escrow. So really, it's come January that we're going to see the real impact of this, because a lot of notes are going to be coming due. A lot of notes are going to be renewed. Folks have to keep money in escrow. They do, they don't. But if you didn't have a note on your property, let's say, and you just didn't pay, yeah, ultimately that could wind up with a lien on your property.
Even your water bill. You don't pay your water bill, it can put a lien on your property. See, so here again, we have the mayor who's saying, or signaling to people.
Mhm.
You won't get yanked into court, you won't get thrown out of your apartment if you don't pay. And people take that in different ways. But at the same time, demanding that everybody pay their property tax, and they're still gonna give you a penalty, it just won't be horrible if you pay late. And we have speed cameras, and still on, even though school's closed, and so they're collecting that tab too. Of course, we have sales tax still being collected, and then on top of it all, we have the state now coming in with Cuomo and saying we're going to have COVID rules for dining. And here's these COVID. If you're a tap room, you can have stuff on the bar. If you're a bar that never had a table, you have to put in tables. And you don't have to have food service because you don't have food service, but you have to have food on the tables, and nobody has to eat it. But that. Then if you're a restaurant, you have to have food on the table. You have people up to order. Crazy rule.
More substantial than chicken wings, like a sandwich, is what he said.
Right. Not chicken wings, it's a sandwich. Because apparently COVID knows the difference between ordering chicken wings or a sandwich while you drink. And you have to close by 11 o'clock because, COVID only, comes out after 11 o'clock, apparently. And COVID comes out when you're standing up, not when you're sitting down. 100 different rules. But where I'm going with this is, at the same time that he issues those rules, he then puts 6 new agencies on with more inspectors to go out and inspect all of the establishments to make sure they're following the convoluted information that he has put down. Look, we all know that what he wanted to try and avoid was a whole bunch of people shoulder to shoulder, standing at a bar, drinking, whatever, spitting. So why don't you just say, you have to be seated at a table if you want to drink at a restaurant or a bar. There is no standing at the bar service. And if you never had tables, buy yourself a whole bunch of portable ones and put them around. That's number one. Number two is, let's talk about that we were 4 days from opening with inside dining. And that meant that those restaurants all had to staff up, all purchase produce weeks in advance, right? Because we knew 4 days. Right. So they got their orders in, they got their purveyors in. 4 days out, it was canceled. No notice whatsoever. So now what happens to all that food? Now what happens to all that staff? Now what happens? The city and the state never think about the next step of the small business owner. They think about things, while they're sitting around the table talking to other wonks about, oh, this sounds real good. But they don't think about the impact that their rules and regulations are going to have with the small business owners. But they do proudly announce that in less than 10 days, he inspected 13,000 bars and restaurants. And in one day, he closed 36 of them. And, he says it as if it's something to be proud of, but he doesn't realize that means that all of those waitresses, all of those bartenders, all of those people are now back out on unemployment.
Right.
And he's good. Yeah.
Yes to everything you said, right? And that goes back to there's no other side to this, but I've also been in government, so I understand it's inexact, but yes to everything you said, but it really speaks to the issue of balance, right? They don't have people, or they're not listening to people that are discussing these issues, or they're just hearing it and saying, look, we're just going to do what we think is in the best interest of public health, and everything else will sort itself out. If that's the attitude, well, then let it sort itself out, right? Let Staten Island do for Staten Island, right? Let Fifth Avenue in Brooklyn open up the street dining with those stanchions and blockades that have to be X number of inches. Then let them do it, right? And but they're asking it to just sort of sort itself out, but then they're not letting people do it. And I think that's where so much of the frustration is. So let Staten Island do, let Brooklyn do, let's see what's going on in Queens, but it's all connected, it all cascades. So before the COVID crisis, we were talking about a crisis in NYCHA, public housing, and elevators being broken and stairwells being crowded and dark and tragedies occurring there. Well, okay, that just exacerbates exponentially the problems inherent in a public health crisis. So, that's why NYCHA has been a hotspot for these things. So all the problems that existed before are worse now. And that just, again, speaks to the lack of leadership at the city level. But to your wider point, yes, and that speaks to balance.
Well, the reason I bring it up is because for your constituency, right? For your membership, we have to think for the good of the whole city. We have to distinguish and we have to educate people on who really owns these buildings. And these are not conglomerate corporations that have mega bucks smoking big cigars on their yacht going, these idiots are paying me all this rent. Today I asked a question on Facebook, who do you trust more to keep you healthy? You're a small business owner, to keep customers healthy, small business owner or government. I was, I guess, not surprised that so many young people said neither. They don't trust small business. And the words that they used was thieves, greedy, derogatory terms, as if creating a business and employing people and greed are inherent. They go hand in hand. I don't understand, where this is coming from. And I think that it's so very important for the leaders in government to start to recognize that without your membership, they won't have anyone to lead.
We talk about these restaurants opening, closing, reopening, supplying themselves with what they need, and then things being shut down. So let's say you have a 6, 10, 12 unit building, and it's entirely rent stabilized units, or 8 of the 12 are stabilized units. Well, you had a retail space, whether it was a bar or a restaurant or retail, but probably a bar or restaurant, that was paying a okay rent and was subsidizing the operations of the building and the balance sheet of the building for all those other for the stabilized units. Well, in the quarantine, the COVID crisis, that restaurant's been closed. That bar's been closed. That retail outlet's been closed. So all those retail spaces, when people walk around in Manhattan, neighborhoods in Brooklyn, Queens, maybe less so in Staten Island, but still also when on the North Shore, definitely. When you're walking and you see these closed restaurants and closed retail, look up. If it's an apartment building, that retail space, that restaurant, that bar was subsidizing the operations of that building, and that's been closed. And these are folks, it's not as if the pandemic aid an extra $600 a week is somehow going to help make the rent on a restaurant that was paying X amount. So again, to look at the whole board and to see everything connected and understand that if you pull on this string over here, something moves over there. And if you pull at a thread over here, something there gets unraveled. There's just been a lot of putting out little fires and not thinking about the consequence of it for landlords, managers, tenants, the buildings that work there, the folks that work there, the restaurants nearby, the diners nearby, the paint supplier, the hardware store nearby. There's just been folks trying to left each other through talking points. And that's not governing.
That's not governing. So we're going to have a glut of commercial space.
Okay, great.
And there have been people who have suggested that, we have some conversions from commercial to residential. My question to you is, do you see people coming into New York who's going to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to take my commercial space and I'm going to, I'm going to buy this commercial space for a song, and I'm going to convert it to residential, and I'm going to make some money, even with all of the restrictions that are in place right now between the city and the state. Do you think that you're going to see people of quality coming into the?
I don't know about commercial conversions to residential, although I know this is a very big issue in Staten Island, especially around the mall rezoning issue and the possibility of that. But I think the issue is going to be, we're going to see intergenerational second, third generation owners, especially in immigrant communities, say, I'm out, I'm not doing this anymore. And then folks coming in who have cash to buy buildings that are not going to have the connection to the tenants and not have the interest in working with tenants. And, everything builds up. Last year in 2019, they passed the Housing Stability and Tenant Protection Act, which sounds nice. Who could be opposed to those things? But really what it did was make it exceptionally difficult for owners to maintain their buildings and maintain investment in their buildings. And there was this activist in Chinatown, I won't mention her name, who was all in on passing this legislation. And then it passed, and then there was this rash of elderly folks in Chinatown saying, I can't do this anymore, I'm going to sell. And then the same activist went online to decry the lack of, community ownership in these buildings. So I called this person and said, what did you think would happen? You think an 85-year-old person is going to stick around for all this? And they said, well, I wanted both of them. I said, I don't think those things can coexist the way you envision. So again, that's the lack of balance that we're talking about.
And it's the lack of experience, I think.
Right.
And I think that, people have to be, just so that George had a pop off. He had another call to take, so he asked me to say goodbye to you, but he'll talk to you later on. But I think that overall we have to recognize that things are going to change in not only this city but all cities, because people are going to recognize that they don't need all that commercial space. People are going to start moving just because of COVID, not because of anybody's handling of it. I think just because of COVID and the shutdowns, and that the big cities tended to be shut down more and longer than some of the more suburban areas. I think that we're going to see a shift out of big cities. And I think that people have to recognize that everyone wants to live in a safe, clean place. They want to raise their kids in a place where the system works, and where public safety isn't an issue. Nobody wants their kid jumping in and getting
I
shot.
agree. And I think it's important, because I know we have to wrap up soon. I think it's important that we not just present problems, that we talk about what can happen next. And we could talk about what a return to the middle. The middle doesn't mean it's bad. The middle doesn't mean it's compromised. And it's the middle itself that shifts, right? So if the middle now means a greater embrace of diversity and social justice issues and a recognition of past patterns of discrimination and practice that need to be addressed and remedied proactively, if it means changes to a lot of things, okay, yes. But the middle still means that you are deliberate about your decision making, that you're not driven by talking points, that you work on compromise and say, if nobody is happy with this solution and everyone's getting some of it, that's what works. And that you don't have to vilify landlords, cops. You don't have to vilify small business owners. The middle means that all these considerations are taken into place. And I believe the pendulum does swing back to that, and conversations will be, and decisions will be made in the middle for no other reason than the numbers have to make sense. And there's what we can afford, and there's how the city could be funded and how the state could be funded and how these decisions are made. So I don't want folks to think that it's just Michael, Leticia, and George getting on and being negative about these things and saying young people today don't understand. What we're saying is that it has to make sense, and decisions need to be made in a place where all stakeholders and voices are heard, even those that the radical left might not like, for their own issues. But that's my plug for a return to the middle.
Well, I love the return, your plug for a return to the middle, because at the end of the day, the middle is always the place where the majority of people stand. And,
Right.
the one thing that I hope for is that people understand that they do not tie necessarily to the color of people's skin or their ethnicity or their religion with how much money they earn. You know, I mean, I know too many people, including activists who are representing an ethnic group, who seem to think that everybody of this ethnic group is poor, everybody of this ethnic group is rich, everybody of this religious group is rich.
Right.
We have to understand that there is a wealth of opportunity in America, and there are many people that do own property that come from other countries and saved and fought and scrimped and got themselves here and took advantage of what America had to offer, and now are a proud homeowner. And when you say, screw you, I don't want you to have rent, you are hurting that person. And you also
well, I say, come to an RSA general membership meeting and you will see the full diversity of New York City. But it's. I think we cannot be afraid of having these conversations, and we can't be afraid of difficult conversations and awkward conversations if it advances, again, diversity and social justice issues in a context of our city also has to pay its bills and keep itself attractive for families that want to be here and use the schools and participate and pay taxes. And, it's, because at some point, as the activists who are driving these conversations, I think in a very reckless way, get older and look around and say, okay, what was that thing you were saying again about the Lindsay administration? What did we do then? And at some point, we'll see who's around to talk. But I am cautiously optimistic that conversations like this will help lead the way to that. And of course, the work we do at RSA and the work we do with our shared friends in labor and small business community. But, we can't stop having these conversations.
Right. So, Michael, John Greco joined us, but we're running over. Why don't you tell everybody, if you are a landlord and you want to get involved in RSA, how do they do it?
I will give you my email address right now, and the world could have it. It's easy. It's mtobman at rsanyc.org. Again, that's mtobman at rsanyc.org. And I will tell you all about the benefits of RSA membership and how you can help. The more, the better, And
you have a website too?
We do. It's rsanyc.org. And you think you have 26,000 members representing over 1 million units, that a new member doesn't, it's like a drop in the ocean. I'm telling you, every new member matters, and every new member is heard, and every voice is heard.
And it's important because if we're going to save this city, if we're going to preserve it in the future, it's going to happen with landlords and tenants coming together and having mutual respect for one another, and government officials respecting the hard work it is to maintain a building in New York City and provide housing for tenants. Michael Tobman, it is always a pleasure, and to have you for an hour was a real treat. An hour and 3 minutes and 30
You
seconds.
are, without a doubt, one of my favorite people. So this
And
is
the feeling is mutual.
George too, but he's not on the call now, so I could say it's you.
Now he dropped off. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we'll see you Friday at 2:00. You have a great Monday. Bye-bye, Mike.